great relationship with both of my parents, for my entire life. I used to do everything with Dad. We used to play ball, we used to go to ball games. He was my mentor, he was my idol. I grew up always idolizing my father.
Growing up, my father was always there for the family. He was a strong man, he was independent, he did anything for the family. He was a tough guy, never asked for help. Whatever was needed, he took care of for the family. You could always count on him. Throughout the life, I looked up to him as my role model. And honestly, still today, afterwards, I still do.
So my dad died October 5th, 2012. About 10 years prior to that, I saw my first sign that something was wrong. I was having a conversation with my father, and I brought up something we had just done a couple of weeks prior, and he had no recollection of it at all, which kind of shocked me and surprised me and saddened me. So the first two people I spoke to were my brother and my sister, who hadn't noticed anything. I then went to my mother, and I said, I think we have a problem with Dad, and her response to me was, yes, I know. So my question was, what are you doing about it? And my mother said, we're going for our physicals in a couple of months, and I'll talk to the doctor then. I said, no, you're going to the doctor now, so we can try and get ahead of this as quickly as possible, and we're not going to wait. Met my dad. They diagnosed him with something called mild cognitive impairment, which is sort of a precursor to Alzheimer's. So at the time he was diagnosed with that, Dr. Todd put him on several medications. Unfortunately, there is no cure for Alzheimer's. Hopefully there will be sometime in my lifetime, because I'm afraid of getting Alzheimer's. But there are drugs that can slow the progression of the disease right now. So my dad went on those medications, and every time a new clinical trial came out, we were always first in line to try and make sure that my dad would be one of the individuals in that clinical trial. So initially, Dad's disease progression for the first 5 to 7 years or so after he was diagnosed, the disease progression was very slow. I mean, he was forgetful. You could tell there was something wrong, but it was very, very slow. After about 7 years or so, the disease progression started to accelerate. And it was becoming a burden on my mom. It was becoming a burden on the entire family. And one of the things that my brother, my sister, and I were concerned about was that the stress was taking its toll on our mother, and she would predecease my dad, which is not uncommon when you talk about caretakers for all diseases, just not Alzheimer's disease.
In my case, my husband was functional. He could walk, he could move. We went out, we went to a movie. He may not have understood what he saw, but he went. He ate well, he fed himself, but when you have Alzheimer's, there comes a time when you lose your sense of smell and taste. So whatever I cooked for him, he said was always good, even though there was no taste. I could give him a sandwich of nothing, just toast, and he'd say, what a delicious meal, because he had no sense of taste.
One night when me and my mother went out, my sister and niece were taking care of my father because he wasn't able to be alone. So we went out for dinner that night, and as we're coming back, we pull into the parking lot, and there they are, screaming, crying, running towards us. We didn't know what was going on at first. Then they started explaining to me that my father threw them out. They didn't know who they were, they didn't know why they were there, but he demanded that they get out. So to keep their safety, they left immediately. Right after that, me and my mother went up to talk to my father and see what was going on. At this point, the Alzheimer was kicking in more. He was having lapses. He really didn't know who we were. After we talked for a while, and me and my mother sat him down, he started to calm down and remember things like he used to remember. He remembered her again. He remembered me. He didn't remember throwing out my sister or my niece. But at that point there, we knew things were progressing quicker than we wanted, and we knew something was going to happen and things were going to have to change soon. We just didn't know what would change and how soon it would happen.
Then we used to watch TV in the bedroom. We'd go in bed and watch TV, and I had a big picture on the dresser of our wedding picture. And he said to me one night, "You should leave before my wife comes home." And I showed him the picture and I said, "There I am is in the picture." He said, "No, that's not you. You should leave right now before my wife comes home." And then there was a time when he just pushed me out of the bed and I fell on the floor. So I still didn't put him in a facility because I just couldn't. And then the time came when he frightened me.
I got a frantic phone call from my mother. She said I needed to get over to the house immediately. My father was out of control. He did not remember her. He was threatening her. He demanded that she leaves the house before his wife comes home. So I dropped what I was doing and headed over to the house. At that point there, my uncle Jerry was already there. That would be my mother's brother. And the two of them plus my father was sitting on the couch. I came in to talk to them. I looked at my father, asked him what was going on, and he had kind of a blank stare. He didn't know who I was, what I was saying. He didn't know my mother or my uncle. I asked him certain questions. He started giggling and laughing like I was making things up. He insisted that we all leave before his wife comes home. At that point there, I continued to talk to him, tried to jog memories. It's an Alzheimer's. The current memories fade, but the older memories stay there. So I talked about his time at the Transit Authority, the Korea War, Coney Island, and he remembered those type of things and he started to calm down. A little while later, he started coming around a little bit, but not totally. About a half hour after that, my sister came over and she started to assess the situation and go through her round of questionings. At that point there, we knew my mother was not safe to be in the house with my father anymore. So after everybody left, my uncle stayed until I can go home and get a change of clothes. I came back and spent the night at the house just to make sure nothing would happen. My mother slept in the living room couch. My father was in their bedroom and I was in the other room. I didn't sleep all night just because I wasn't sure if he was going to come in or anything was going to happen. The next morning, we knew we were in a panic situation. Through the support group that we went to, we met a couple people and we called one of those persons that dealt with an assisted living facility. She actually came over the house. The person from the facility came over. We did the registration. And we actually got my father in that facility a couple hours later, the same day.
My dad lived there for the last year of his life. He lasted there about 1 year. And once he was there, the disease really started progressing. You know, I had a test I did with my father every time I saw him. My dad and I learned from my dad, was always a diehard New York Yankees fan. So every time I saw my father, even in the last weeks leading up to his death, I would always say to him, "Hey Dad, the Boston Red Sox are doing great. They're going to win the World Series this year." And he would look up at me and say, "I hate the damn Red Sox." And that was my way of knowing there was still a little piece of him in there.
After my father was placed, we knew in order to keep his memory alive as long as possible, we needed to visit him. It's important to visit people at facilities, not to try and catch people doing things wrong, but to make sure they know that the family is involved and they can come anytime they want, and we want to make sure our loved ones are taken care of. The facility was doing a great job. I'd go to see my father. He'd smile at me, he'd be happy. He still noticed me and knew who I was. As time went on, he still knew who I was. I don't think he remembered I was his son at the end, just that I was a friendly face that he could trust and talk to.
So the last week, my dad died October 5th, which was a Friday. On that Monday, we received a call from the facility he was living in that they couldn't wake him up. Now, my dad had been under the care and watch of hospice for several months prior, but we had made the decision that we were not going to transfer him to the hospital to do some heroic life-saving type of measures because my father's brain at that point was gone.
The last couple of days, the family spent most of the days and nights there. And then the final day we knew it was close, and we all left about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. About 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, the hospice nurse called me directly and told me that my father had passed. I told her to call me, not my mother, because my mother did not need to get a phone call in the middle of the night. I called my brother and my sister to head over there. I called my uncle who met me at my mother's house because we wanted to tell her together so she wouldn't be alone. We picked her up, we took her to the facility. We all had our private moments with them to say goodbye. And then the funeral home came and picked them up.